Greetings, friends. We're running a couple of minutes behind, so I'd like to begin. My name is Robin Junker-Boyce. I'm the pastor here at the First Congregational Church in Thetford, Vermont, on Thetford Hill. And I welcome you here tonight. We are here again for a second time. We had met right after the Trump administration passed the zero-tolerance policy, separating children from their families at the border. We're here again, and I want to just thank our refugee support team here at FCCT. Sherry Merrick, thank you, is the force behind this. And Marion Ray Chin, Scott Zenz, Robin Osborne is on our team, and who else is on our refugee support team? Dane Breslin. And Marion Ray, you did hear me say that. Tonight we're here again because, yes, we're concerned, outraged, sick to our stomach that our country and our culture, our taxpayer dollars separate, actually inflict pain on people who are desperate and suffering. And we inflict pain on children. That's why we're meeting here tonight. And so we're going to take some time. We're going to listen to some voices, some important voices that are engaged in this conversation. And we're going to be listening for guidance. We're going to find support together. And we are going to discern some action steps. So we might become a bomb instead of a weapon. So I want to welcome Annelise Orleck, who is here tonight. She's a Dartmouth history professor. Many of you know Annelise. She's going to be speaking about the war on women in Honduras for about 5 minutes. And then Susan Sussman, again, thank you so much for being here. Susan, she is going to report from Senator Leahy's office about the work that she's engaged in. We have a call-in with Peter Welch, our congressman, around 7 o'clock. And then we have Doris and Mark and Ken Burns, and Doris and Mark Hampton, who went to the detention center in Homestead, Florida. And they're going to show us a 5-minute video and then speak about their experiences. Kelley is here from the National Lawyers Guild, and she's going to just take 10 to 15 minutes to talk about what the National Lawyers Guild, how the National Lawyers Guild can support us, can support citizens in taking action, and then we'll have a Q&A with the entire panel. So thank you for being here. And Annelise, I'd like to call you forward.
So the rhetoric in Trump's re-election kickoff last night was about how those who oppose their border policies are seeking to let in quote-unquote criminals and rapists. And so I really want to turn that on its head. I think it's what we need to understand, that in fact, those who are coming are trying to flee a country that is now controlled by criminals and rapists, whose power was shored up after a coup overthrew the relatively progressive, democratically elected President Manuel Zelaya in 2009. And we have to take responsibility for that, because even then, the United States State Department and President under Obama and Clinton supported those who made the coup. So those who did have opened up this country to a level of violence that in some arenas is unmatched anywhere else in the world. One of the things I think it's important is Trump yesterday, quote unquote, permanently, though I don't think a president can do that since Congress controls the purse strings, cut off aid to the countries in Central America most egregiously hit by this violence, and from which most of the refugees are coming to our border. Chief of Staff Mick Mulvaney said, if the aid is working so well, then why are people still coming? And the answer is very simple. They're coming because they don't want to die. And if I get one point across tonight, all I wanted us to talk about is that the situation is so bad that Trump's concentration camps are not going to stop them. And we need to know that, we need to understand that, and I also want to say, I've stood in front of this church a couple of times as your Jewish neighbor, and as your Jewish neighbor, I just want to say how grateful I am to AOC for calling them what they are, concentration camps. Honduras has been called the world's most dangerous country for women. Here in Honduras, women aren't worth anything, said Teresa Munoz, both of whose daughters were murdered in 2014. The only reason the cases were investigated is because one of them had just been crowned Miss Honduras and was on her way to the Miss World contest in London. She had the misfortune of watching her sister's boyfriend kill her sister, and as a result, as she was attempting to flee, they put 12 bullets, her boyfriend put 12 bullets in her back. All of the egregious crimes I'm going to describe to you, and I apologize, I don't normally traffic in violent images, but I think we need to understand what people are fleeing and why the desperation and why they are willing to get on the road with their kids and suffer all that they are suffering, including being held in cages by this obscene administration. The only reason those cases were investigated, because 96% of the murders of women in Honduras are not, is because she was in the news, because she had just won the Miss Honduras crown. Honduran activist Nisa Medina, who works for the Honduras Center for Women's Rights, said, "We're talking about, since the 2009 coup, a culture of gangs, guns, and girls where a man's power is measured in bullets. There's drug-related crime and governmental indifference, but she says, quote, men can do anything they want to women in Honduras. We think it's common. It's something that you can just expect living here. In a country the size of Ohio, a woman is murdered every 16 hours, and the killers can expect that absolutely nothing will happen to them." That's why they're adopting the term that was used in Ciudad Juarez, just over the border in Mexico some years back, femicide. These are specifically misogynist crimes. That is the point, and that is why before 2011, most of the refugees who came to our border were young men looking for work. Since 2011, at least in terms of those coming from Central America, the bulk of those who have created the supposed crisis, 70% are claiming that they're fleeing violence, and many of them are women. So I just want to talk to you for one moment about, I see Sherry looking at her watch. So a couple of quick things. The kind of murder is not done privately, it's done publicly, and it's done to send a message. Women are literally being ritually slaughtered in front of their families, in front of their children. And I have descriptions of the crimes, but I will spare you them for lack of time. But understand that people feel that they have absolutely no choice. I am in constant fear, said one woman. I leave my house, but I never know if I will return. Just because you are a woman, you feel hatred. Someone is always trying to kill you. The flip side of this, and this epidemic of rape, is so intense that people talk about 10 and 11-year-old girls turning up pregnant. And as one person said, the only reason they do is because that's when they've started to menstruate. That's when they've started to ovulate. So now they can become pregnant. But they have been subject to systematic rape before that. Can't report it. There is no justice, no trials. But also, if you do, you can assume that you will die. Right? And so when women do report it, if they have a signed order keeping the men away from them, the women call it signing my own death warrant, because nothing will be happen. There's no choice. There is no choice but to come to the United States. Whatever hazards lurk along the way feel less daunting than life in Choloma, the most violent city and the most violent country in the world for women. My mom said the journey was very dangerous, said a 14-year-old who was on her way. And I told her, I know, Mom, but I can no longer continue to live here. That is the situation we're facing, and that is why that is who is in these camps, right? Our mothers and daughters fleeing that kind of violence.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for having me again. Thank you, Sherry, for inviting me again. I'm Susan Sussman, and I am an immigration caseworker in Senator Leahy's office. So, and I think of Thetford as this magical community, and that got reinforced as I was driving down because, okay, people in Thetford, the Tucker Hill Road sign is off its, and I think that's intentional. So, you know, so people really have to know and how to get here. So we were able to get there because my GPS didn't work. So, again, very, very happy to be here. And, you know, as everybody is saying, we are living in pretty dangerous times. Immigrants and refugees are being demonized and dehumanized, and nothing shows that more than what's happening on our southern border. Seeing the images of how people, and especially children, are being treated strikes us all very, very deeply. It strikes the senator very deeply. He's been down to the southern border. He has met with children. He has spoken out not only in public statements, but also as vice chair of the Senate Appropriations Committee. And I believe Sherry shared with many people here the senator's recent statement about the request from the administration for supplemental funding for the Department of Health and Human Services Office of Refugee Resettlement, which is running out of money. They will run out of money by the end of this month, I believe, if there was an appropriation. And this is a difficult situation because you have an administration who has been certainly not handling this situation in the southern border very well, and actually handling it horrifically, and yet having the funds to humanely provide services for families and especially for children is needed. So as Senator Leahy has strongly stated, we also have a responsibility to put basic conditions on the money to make sure that it is appropriately spent. We cannot provide a blank check, especially to this administration. So I was planning to read to you from the statement that the senator made about the request for this supplemental appropriation. And so right before I drove down and left Burlington, I sent an email to some people on the appropriations staff, committee staff, and said, am I assuming correctly that nothing has happened on this supplemental appropriation? And then I just, because I'm not going to read the text while I'm driving, as I pulled into the parking lot, I checked my email and it passed. It came out of the Senate committee. It was voted out of the Senate committee this afternoon, today. Could have been this morning or this afternoon. So now I have something new to read, which is why I was desperately looking for a charger for my phone so I can tell you what this committee what they voted on. The vote out of the Senate Appropriations Committee was 30-1. Okay, so this was of course it still needs to get through the whole Senate, and the Speaker, not the Speaker, the Majority Leader Mitch McConnell needs to, get this through, and then it goes over to the House, which may make even more improvements, and then, of course, it has to be signed by the current president. So this was a compromise bill. Clearly, very, very rarely do you see a vote of 30-1 out of any committee, but it had to be compromised, but there were tremendous safeguards put in and demanded by the Democrats on the committee. And I think oh, there it goes. It's going to have to come back on. It was saving power. So, but I'm going to tell you first what the senator said in his press release just this afternoon. These are extraordinary circumstances, and we have the opportunity to show the world what American values are by acting with compassion. We do not tear children from their families. We do not address a humanitarian crisis blindly detaining anyone who comes to our border seeking mercy and safety. We do not vilify the poor, abused, desperate, or hungry. We take proper care of those in our custody. This is the wishful thinking, and hopefully this will help this. This package is a humanitarian package to address the desperate needs on our southern border, and it is a good faith compromise. So there were, and let me see if I can get this up. There's a one-pager that was just released about what all the, it's starting up, so I'm going to say something else while this comes up. Annelise mentioned the withholding of funds from the Northern Triangle that were appropriated. Again, a bipartisan appropriations. I see people nodding out here. And that appropriation, I think it was $500 million, and it was put on hold by this administration. The money was supposed to go to address the root causes in Honduras, Guatemala, El Salvador, dealing with gang violence, raping, killing, poverty, and this was supposed to be going there, and the administration put a hold on it. Senator Leahy is furious about this. There was another subcommittee hearing with everybody's acting in this administration, acting Department of Homeland Security Secretary McAleenan, and the senator strongly questioned him about what's going on. We appropriated this money, why is it not going? And got a very non-response response to that question. During that hearing, the senator also was also strongly questioning why ICE is deporting veterans, people who have served our country and are being deported. And that's only supposed to happen after very senior officials have reviewed the recommendation for deportation, and the information that was coming to our office was that that is not happening, that extra review is not happening. The acting secretary said, oh, yes, it is. So a disconnect there. Okay. So this is $400 million less than the Trump administration requested, but it's still $4.6 billion. And the oversight and constraining, these are the provisions for oversight and constraining the Trump administration. No funding for the Trump wall and no funding for extra ICE detention beds. Prohibits Department of Homeland Security transfers of any funding in this bill to any other purpose. That is a big deal because they try to raid this all the time. Prohibits information obtained from potential sponsors of unaccompanied children from being used in immigration enforcement actions. You know how big that is. There was a strong concern that they were not releasing children to their families if there was any information, or if they learned any information that anybody in the household to which the children were being released was then going to be used to deport those sponsors. So there's a provision in there to prevent that sharing of that information. Ensures congressional oversight visit. They were keeping congressional representatives and senators out of the detention facilities, not allowing them in. So this is part of this bill. Ensures congressional oversight visits to ORR facilities within 48 hours notice. Temporary facilities in operation for more than 6 months must meet new minimum standards, and all new CBP processing facility must meet national standards on transport, escort, detention, and search. Requires monthly public reporting on children being separated from their families. As you know, many more children were separated than originally reported. The supplemental includes, I won't give all the specific, money in new funding for migrant care, processing facilities, food, medical services, and safe transportation, 30 new immigration judge teams to address the backlog, money to expand alternatives to detention programs by an estimated 13,500 people, money in grants for nonprofits who care for migrant families. That could be Catholic Charities, racists, I mean, many, many nonprofits who are doing incredible work, actually on both sides of the border. Okay, I'm just reading this for the first time. $10 million for the legal orientation program to educate migrants about their rights and the legal process at the border. This administration ended that program. So, and I know somebody who was teaching in this program, and then the funding was withdrawn, and you couldn't do it. It's been shown that people who participate in this program, legal orientation program, actually are more likely to show up for their hearings than people who don't. And then finally, $9 million to speed up placement of unaccompanied children with sponsors and manage their cases. That's the bill. Those are the extra provisions. I'm incredibly proud of my boss, who was deeply involved in working out this compromise. So thank you for having me here. And I just want to, one more final thing, and then we'll turn hopefully to the Congressman. News in this happens almost every day, whether it's a deeply soul-searing, horrible bit of news or other things. I happened to meet this morning with a delegation of people from Mexico who were brought here on a program through the Vermont Council on World Affairs. And they were specifically up here talking about human trafficking, and that's the focus a lot of the folks in this delegation. It's 3 women and 3 men. One of the women is actually a senator in Mexico. And these are folks who are on the ground working in Juarez, working in Tijuana, with all of these issues. Some are researchers, some are actual nonprofit service providers, and they are panicked about the other bit of news this week, which is that the administration, after people are here, are coming and signing up for asylum, are now being shipped back to Mexico as part of the new deal that the Mexican government agreed to in exchange of not being slapped with 5% more in tariffs. That was what it is, right? An extra 5% tariff. In exchange for not doing that tariff, Mexico agreed to take people back. And so about 500 people a day are being shipped back and dumped right across the border in these towns that do not have the infrastructure to handle the influx. And these folks we were talking about that a lot this morning. So I said I was coming here also to, there you go. My final word, we're coming here to talk to people today, and that you were doing a fundraising. And I can't talk about where you should put your money or what kind of activism to do, but I will say what he said, which is, what organization are they donating to? And I mentioned RAISES, and he said, oh, that is fantastic. They do fantastic work. So let me end on that note, and thank you all for your compassion and for your continuing activism. Thank you very much.
So we're all with open ears, Peter. Thank you.
Well, I mean, unfortunately, you know where we are. I mean, we've got a president who just yesterday, went down to Florida and announced this re-election, and he made that coincide with an announcement that he was going to have the millions of people swept up and deported. So what we have is a situation where President Trump, who is the architect of this border policy, including the family separation policy, is president, and he is everything I can see, he's doubling down on that effort, and he's making it. Obviously, it's not an accident that his announcement about these internal sweeps coincided with his reelection announcement, and there's enormous concern here among many of my colleagues, and obviously it's on my side of the aisle. And of course, we have a lot of members who represent border districts, and also have family members who live in some of the countries that they're really affected by this. So we have a majority in the House, but we don't have any majority in the Senate. But a number of the things that we're trying to do is both on appropriations and on statutory legislation, oppose, obviously, the family separation policy, oppose any money for family separation steps, really limit money for immigrant detention. And you heard from Susan's testimony, I understand, and of course Senator Leahy's working hard on that part of it over in the Senate. And there's a lot of us that are proposing increasing funding for services for unaccompanied migrant children and legal services. And the budget that we're considering doesn't provide any additional funding for Border Patrol agents and sets a really daily limit on the number of migrants that can be held in detention. And I could go on for another 5 minutes. The humanitarian standards for individuals in Customs and Border Patrol custody and the Keeping Families Together Act, both of which I'm a co-sponsor of. But the bottom line here is that we've got an executive, and the executive has a substantial amount of authority when it comes to immigration policy, who is doubling down on making this an issue and basically refusing to engage in what we all know has to be done, and that is a comprehensive immigration bill that deals with all of the issues. And also, we've got to be doing all we can to help those countries that are suffering from enormous crime, violence, and lack of governance and economic desperation. And that's particularly Honduras, El Salvador, and Guatemala. But, you know, I do believe that it's really important that citizens be speaking out. It was really, you know, remember your last meeting was right after I came back from the border, and officially the administration ended its family separation policy. And we're doing all we can to get facts and figures and transparency about what really happened, because we're quite aware of the fact that while they claim that they've ended it, we're not so sure. And the claimed reunification of children with their parents hasn't really happened. So, you know, it's incredibly devastating to the families that are involved, to the children that are involved. And it's incredibly frustrating for those of us who are, and everyone there, who are just absolutely committed to trying to bring this policy to an end when we've got a chief executive who's got a lot of levers of power that we're trying to overcome.
So, we went to Homestead from April 29th to May 3rd. As mentioned earlier, Homestead is about a half hour south of Miami. It's sort of the last outpost before you get to the Florida Keys. It's very hot and very flat, kind of dreary. Other members of the Concord community had visited Homestead previously. We have a group in Canterbury called Canterbury Citizens for Democracy, which we started in November of 2016. Concord started a group called the Kent Street Coalition, also about the same time. And from the small town of Loudon, which is next to Canterbury, there were a couple other people. So a group of about 10 of us went to bear witness to what was happening here. Okay? The Air Force Base, which houses this detention center, is at the far end of the city. So people, for the most part, don't get to drive by it. Everybody knows there's an Air Force Base there. But what most don't realize is that it's a child prison. It's a detention center. The base is surrounded by about a 7 or 8 foot fence that you cannot see through. So we brought ladders across the street so we could be high enough up to watch the kids as they filed out. Everything's single file. They filed out. They did their calisthenics. They played soccer on and off during the day. And we, at times, when there was a little lull in the action, would try to communicate as best we could. All the boys wore different colored T-shirts, playing soccer, and I would yell out, for example, "Oye, camiseta verde," hey, green shirt. And the kid with the green shirt would turn around, and I would say, "¿Cómo te llamas? What's your name?" And he'd say, "Me llamo Pedro," or "Me llamo Jose," or whatever. And that was really the extent of the communication. We held up signs, as you saw in the video, that we're with you. We held up big hearts. We held up signs that, again, these are all in Spanish, that said, "We love you," and so on. In addition to standing across the street from the site, we also would spend time at the major intersection on the main drag about a mile down in the center of Homestead. And we held up our signs, and when the light turned red, people would stop. Some of them would roll down the windows and ask, "What's this all about?" And we would explain to them what was going on. Many people, as I mentioned, are unaware of the Child Detention Center. In one case, for example, a woman, older woman, rolled down the window. Her daughter was driving, and she was obviously Hispanic. I asked her where she was from. She told me Mexico. I asked her what part, and so on. We had a little conversation. She asked me, what's this all about? I explained to her, and she reached out and shook my hand. So that was basically the kind of interaction we had with the kids and some of the community. Doris is going to talk now about some of the secrecy, okay, and some of the financial situation. Ken is a retired lawyer. He's going to talk briefly about the legal issues involved. And then I'll just finish up with, upon our return, what our visit has generated in the local communities.
I realized I want to share with you how I experienced the witnessing. When the group was organizing to go to Homestead, I tumbled into it. I mean, I was talking to a few people from the church and how discerning they are trying to be about whether they go or not go. But my experience was just the feeling I have to do something, and I went. And wanting so much to communicate with the kids, our care. And there they were for short periods of time. There were long, long hours of witnessing where really nothing was going on. The kids were all indoors, and we didn't know what was going on. We saw them for a few hours a day when they would come out of these large, large tents, and they would come out single file. And we would be on our ladders holding our signs and our hearts and waving them and waving our arms to them. And over the days, we saw that as they came out, they were looking for us up on our ladders, and we were waving to each other and throwing each other hugs and kisses over the 200, 300 feet. And then Mark described to you a little bit of conversation that could go on. And I just found myself, I have a Buddhist practice, and so I was practicing generating loving kindness, metta, within myself and my own heart to hold all of this frightening and terrible stuff that was going on, and to generate that caring to go across the distances. I wanted to share one other witness's experience. They were saying at the end of the day, they could hear the national anthem being played on the Air Force Base, and the contrast of standing there watching these children and hearing our national anthem being played was incredibly painful. To experience both of those things, and the shame of being an American at this time and at this place. Recently on the radio, I was hearing a comparison of the detention camp and the children's experience with people who are incarcerated. And in fact, they were saying that people who are incarcerated are receiving more services than the children who are being detained. People who are incarcerated have more time to talk with loved ones. They can have visits from loved ones. They can receive mail. They have legal services, education, whereas what is being given in this place is very minimal. I have not met any of the children at Homestead. Again, they're on the other side of this fence. But I did meet a middle school aged child, a girl from Honduras who's seeking asylum. She lives in northern New Hampshire right now. And her experience when she came across the border, she came with an aunt and an uncle. And she was separated from them. And she was put into detention. And she was incredibly frightened. She was told to stop crying. If she didn't stop crying, she would never see her relatives again, and she would be deported back to Honduras. And these are the kinds of stories I've seen in other interviews of the verbal abuse and the threatening that is being done. It's really important that when we hear unaccompanied minor, that represents largely children who did come with relatives. So Homestead, 80% of those children ages 13 to 17, 80% of them came with a relative. Just as this middle school child I met, she came with her aunt. These children came with a grandparent, an aunt, an uncle. But we're calling them unaccompanied. So we are still separating families. I realize every time I get back to talking about it, how that deep sadness descends on me again. I wanted to share, how are we doing with time? 1 minute, yeah, okay. Secrecy is one of the things that I was just so amazed by. This for-profit company maintains these opaque fencing. They have guards who circle this place every 2, 3, 4 minutes. There are 2,200 employees there. When I would approach some of the guards who were in permanent little shelters, they would not want to talk to me. They had cameras lined up on them to record anything that they would say. All of the employees have signed non-disclosure forms. They are very, very frightened of being asked questions, and they will not talk. They've also been told to hand over all means of social media so that they are not saying anything about their work experience on social media. It is unlicensed. Because this is on federal land, none of the state laws apply. Whereas the other 168, I think, are all in states, and all the state laws apply. In Florida, they do not. So child abuse registries aren't used. Health department does not do inspection. Education department can't offer services, can't do inspections. Department of Health and Human Services. So again, the degree of secrecy that is being maintained is phenomenal. And I know I'm going over. I just want to give you the financials because it's amazing. It must be very lucrative to be a for-profit corporation and have government contracts because they collect them. Some of these corporations just specialize in it. Homestead, let me just read you these numbers. Homestead costs $750 a day for one child. This is a for-profit. The nonprofit, the other 168, charge $250 a day. So the for-profit is 3 times out of our taxpayer money. We have this St. Paul's elite prep school in our area, and when we prorated over the whole year, it would cost $80,000 for a very posh education. An experience at Homestead for a child costs $273,000 a year, 3 times it. I'll end there.
Good. Hi, I'm Ken Barnes. I am from Kentucky, New Hampshire, even smaller than Concord, tiny little town. And I am privileged to have been able to go down and witness at Homestead, Florida. And before I begin, I have to make a little confession to you. When I first learned about the Child Detention Center at Homestead, I was at a meeting of the Kent Street Coalition, the grassroots group I'm involved with, and we have a human rights subgroup. And I said, this sounds awful. We have to go down there. And we started talking about going down there. At that time, there was also a child detention center in Tornillo, which is near El Paso, Texas. And it just sounded outrageous. But my confession is this. I thought that I needed to go down there and protest and to raise my voice and to let the world hear me shout from the rooftops that this is not who we are as a country, and this is not who all of the good folks that I know are. We're human beings, and we treat all human beings with respect. But I saw it as, I was going to be doing this and changing the world. And that, I'm a white male brought up in this culture of privilege, and I thought that that's what I could do. I mean, I'm a civil rights lawyer. I guess that's what I've been doing for my 40-year career. But when I went down there, I was just astounded because the first thing that I did was walked a little bit down the street from where folks were demonstrating to see the children. And you saw the pictures of the green fence that you can't see through and people standing up on those little ladders. And we did that, and we could see over the fence, and we see these kids. And it was amazing. These young children are, in the background, there's a sidewalk, and in between, the sidewalk's in between 2 gargantuan tents, and behind them are more tents and more tents. And a single file row of these kids comes out with guards in front of them, guards behind them, and they just march out. And it looked to me like, a prison chain gang. And these were children. just marching out, and the guards told them what to do. Come up this way, they went that way. Go back and stand against the wall, they went back and stand against the wall. Come into this other tent, and we think that's where the kids got to eat lunch or something, or dinner, whatever it was at the time, and then they march out 5 minutes later, and another group, single file, with different guards, a little bit smaller than the last group, come marching out. And they're paraded out there really like a prison chain gang, and it was really hard to look at that. I guess that's why they call it witnessing. And it was totally unexpected. I didn't know what I was going to see, but they just, eyes ahead of them, looking straight forward when I first got there. And we started, we're up on these little ladders, and we're waving our big red, 3-foot red hearts, and we're saying, queremos, we love you, estamos con ustedes, we're with you. And the kids, sort of look at us, and they don't, at first they didn't seem to respond that much. And we heard that the guards had told them that we were there to demonstrate, to shut down Homestead Detention Center and deport all the kids back to where they came from. So all these kids think that we're hating them. And so when they started to see us, being supportive of them, and it's, a big red heart, it's kind of hard to think that we hate them, right? And so as the days went by, the kids would, wave back at us sometimes, and, and by the end, they march out from between the tents, and they're looking for us, Oh, are my friends here? Kind of. And they see us, and they smile, and they wave, and blow us kisses and stuff. And I realized that I didn't come down there for myself to get my soapbox and change the world. I came to support these kids and to let them know that there's somebody out there in the world that actually cares about them, that actually thinks of them as human beings, that wants them to have a childhood, a life, and not treat them like criminals. And they got the message, and it was really gratifying to be able to do that. So I know your congregation is thinking about going down there. I would suggest that it's a life-changing thing, and you'll probably be doing what we're doing and coming around and speaking to everybody you can to tell them how horrible this is, these kids having to follow prison-like rules. We heard that the girls who are teenagers, they're starting to menstruate, and they can't get access to sanitary equipment until they get a guard to give it to them. They have to go and tell, I need X, Y, and Z, and the guard writes it down, and they have to show their little IDs, as they have to do everywhere they go. They can't travel without showing their IDs. Well, they can't travel at all, but at least even when they're with the guards, they need the IDs. And they have to get approval every time to get sanitary napkins or whatever they need. And the government, our government, is keeping track of these young girls' periods. It's, I don't know, it's not the way that I could think of my kid being treated. So they have limited phone call time with their parents. They have 10 minutes twice a week. They get 10 minutes to talk to their parents. You heard Jorge Ramos say that was the only time the kids looked happy, was when they were talking to their families. So it was really pretty horrendous. So and one other thing is to keep in mind, which Jorge didn't, I don't think, expound on, is that this is a for-profit prison. And you heard Doris tell you that they charge $7.50 a day per child, which is 3 times more than the nonprofit places charge. So it's kind of like Army toilets. The government is paying 3 times as much here to get the minimal services that they're getting in order that this for-profit business, mega business, military industrial complex business, can make more profits. And John Kelley, Trump's former chief of staff, joined the board. While we were there, actually, we saw him show up on the day he started. Former CIA director, former NSA, National Security Agency director. The people from the security wing of the government, as well as people from the big, I don't know, Boeing or Lockheed, but big military-industrial complex companies. That's who's on the board of this for-profit thing. They're making big profits by oppressing children, and of course, they're brown children, so I guess they think that's okay. But they're making money off oppressing children. Legally, is the stuff that they're doing legal? Well, you know, the president said he stopped the separating families policy, and it didn't look like it was stopped. And then he said he's not stopping it, he's starting it up again, and he just goes back and forth, and whatever he says, whether he says he's starting it or stopping it, obviously they're still separating children. These kids have been in this facility for 6 months or 7 months, something like that on average, and the Flores agreement, the court-ordered settlement agreement in a court case says children in detention should only be kept for 20 days in detention. So these kids have been there for 6 months, yet he says he stopped separating families 6 months or a year ago. And yet all these kids, they keep bringing them in. Doris was talking about secrecy. They bring the kids in buses in the middle of the night, going not on roads, but through the woods, in the dark of night, through the woods, on dirt roads, so nobody knows that they're bringing more kids in here. And they don't let the Congress people go inside and talk to their constituents. You saw the 3 Congress people here. Donna Shalala is in a nearby district, but Murcasul Powell is the Congress member for this district, for Homeland. This is in her congressional district, and she shows up, they won't even let her go inside. They won't let her talk to anybody. She can't talk to the guards, she can't talk to the kids. And so the press conference that you heard of them talking, that was their press conference after they were told they're not allowed to go inside. Pretty darn outrageous. So that's our government oversight of this immigration facility. The Flores agreement, the government says, does not apply to facilities like Homestead because it is not really a child detention center. It is an emergency influx facility. Anybody know what that means? I don't. But they hold children in detention, separated from any of their families. And yes, 20% of the kids in there came alone, but 80% came with some family member of one kind or another, or a sponsor, somebody that was going to hook them up with their cousin in Chicago or whatever. And so I don't see how they can win that argument, the government. But they're still making the argument that Flores doesn't apply, that they don't have to let these kids go after 20 days. We can keep them as long as, I guess, the emergency persists. And, you know, the word emergency is a little bit tricky because there is an emergency. There's an emergency in Central America where the countries that Honduras and Guatemala and El Salvador have all these gangs and government terrorism and massive violence and poverty, and people are fleeing from that. That's an emergency. But there's no emergency that would require the federal government to separate families when they get to California or Texas. There's no emergency that requires that policy of separation. So to say, oh, well, it's an emergency, so we're going to keep these kids in jail as long as we want and not follow a court order that tells them they have to let kids go after 20 days, that's kind of problematic and I think illegal, but the jury, as it were, is still out on that. Lawyers, I guess I don't have much time, if any, but I want you to know that the lawyers in the Flores case filed a motion with the court to challenge the Trump administration's claim that they can keep these kids as long as they want. They said, the Flores lawyers say the Flores court order applies to these kids, and they should be let out in 20 days. So that is in court, and attached to their motion in court, these lawyers attached a number of affidavits from children, from immigrants, talking about why they left and the violence that they were fleeing and fearing for their lives, and also what their experience has been being separated from their families and the trauma that they're undergoing. And I recommend you reading those online. Yeah, I just went to, I think, Flores court order online, and I found a number of articles. One of them had this motion, and you can read the statements from the children, and it'll chill your bones. It really will. So thank you for inviting us. Thank you for listening.
Thank you so much, Robin and Sherry and all of you for being here and talking about this. It's obviously really important and really heavy, really scary, really disgusting. I'm going to just move this up and see if that works. My name is Kelley. I'm an attorney. I live in Windsor. I'm the chair of the Vermont chapter of the National Lawyers Guild. So I'm hoping to just talk about what the Guild does, some of our work in relation to these issues. I know that I, for one, really want answers, like what can we do? And I'm a lawyer, so I have to pretend that I have answers, even though I don't really. But the National Lawyers Guild, for those of you that aren't aware, our mission is to use the law for the people, uniting lawyers, law students, legal workers, and activists as an effective force in the service of people by valuing human and environmental rights over property interests. That's what we do in a nutshell. We're movement lawyers, which essentially means that we solidified the work of communities and of activists and organizers. And just want to say I feel really blessed to be a part of this community, and I see so many awesome activists sitting here in front of me that I feel like I'm, following behind and trying to support as best as I can. The thing that sets the National Lawyers Guild lawyers apart is we lack the typical reverence for the law that you see in most other attorneys. The thing that I hold in my heart as an attorney when I practice is that there's a distinction between legal and illegal, and then there's a distinction between right and wrong, and those things don't line up, and that's what we've seen tonight over and over again, is that there are things that Trump and his administration are claiming to be legal, and that we've heard from Ken are up for debate, but we know that they're immoral. So does it matter whether they're legal or not? And what are the ways that we can use the law and use particularly the Constitution to try to reestablish morality as our compass rather than legality? Just a quick note that a little civics lesson. The Constitution, the first 3 articles are relating to the president, the legislature, and the judiciary. I don't think in that order, but it doesn't matter. And they set out the powers of the government. And the government only has the power to do what is in the Constitution, and they can't just do whatever they want. So that's a tool that we can use. We can say, you're acting outside of the power that you have. And then the Bill of Rights and the rest of the amendments set out protections and say, this is our rights. These are what we as a people have a right to. And you can see that detention centers violate so many human rights and so many constitutional rights, the 5th and 14th Amendments to liberty, life, due process, all of that, and that Trump is going way outside of his confined role that the Constitution has given to him. But the question is that how then do we counter that, and what can we do? And it's difficult, in our position here. Windsor and Thetford are probably like 80 or 90 miles respectively from the border, so we're not near the border where people are traveling through, but that doesn't mean that we don't have undocumented folks or folks that are at risk of deportation in our communities. The nearest deportation center or detention center is in Dover, New Hampshire. That's where people get sent when they get picked up here by ICE or by Border Patrol. So the National Lawyers Guild nationally does a lot of things. We provide support through the National Immigration Project. If you want more information about that or want to contact a lawyer who specializes in immigration, can give resources, the website is nipnlg.org. And talk to me later if you don't remember that, National Immigration Project, so nipnlg.org. And they do any number of legal support for folks that are risking deportation or who are, for example, undocumented but are victims of domestic abuse, because it's terrifying to seek refuge in the courts when you know that the courts are also looking to throw you out of this country. And how do you keep yourself safe when you're at risk even just for trying to protect yourself? Specifically in Vermont, this is what I do as the chair of the National Lawyers Guild. There are kind of two strategies that I employ, and the people that I work with in my organization and with the help of these incredible activists and organizers are first, know your rights trainings. And these are, I do them all over the state, and we do a lot of role plays, and we essentially just lay out, like, what are your rights under the Constitution when you're dealing with law enforcement, when you're dealing with ICE, when you're dealing with Border Patrol. We do one that is specific to the Border Patrol checkpoints. So CBP will pull you over and ask you if you're a citizen, and they just stop a whole line of cars and they ask everybody in the line. You don't have to say anything. You can just sit there in your car and say, I have a right to remain silent. And they will, they'll say, well, pull over, and they'll detain you, but they're constitutionally not supposed to detain you for more than a reasonable time, which is 15 minutes, although a friend of ours recently was pulled over and detained for 45 minutes because they are aware of her as an activist in the community and we're kind of targeting her. But we do these trainings and these role plays so that you are comfortable going through this checkpoint. And depending on whether you are like me and you have white privilege, I don't look like I'm not from here. I look like a Vermonter. I talk like a Vermonter. So I have a lot of privilege in that I'm not a target. So I can go through a Border Patrol checkpoint and I can try to tie up resources. I can say, I'm not going to talk to you. I'm going to remain silent. I can make it hard for them. I can drive somebody else's car through so that when they look up the license plate, it like says my mom or something and she's got a different last name. And they, so that will drain all of their resources focusing on me. And then maybe somebody who isn't documented or is a higher risk of being harassed by Border Patrol, they don't have time to harass everybody because people with white privilege, with documented privilege, are tying up all their resources. So that's one thing that we can do, and I'd love to talk more if anybody wants to come to a training on that. We're doing one in Burlington at the end of July. And other trainings, what to do if ICE comes to your house. There are protections that the Constitution gives you, Fourth Amendment, that law enforcement can't just go in your house without a warrant and like look through it. ICE likes to pretend that they have special privileges within this 100-mile border zone, but most of that privilege just allows them to go on a bus and like heckle people on a bus. It's really, the Fourth Amendment applies the same to cops as it does to ICE and Border Patrol, with the one key difference that if you go to immigration court versus if you go to regular court. Like if a cop searched my car and he found some illicit substances, but he didn't have a probable cause or a warrant to search my car, I could go to court and I could say, you violated my Fourth Amendment rights. And if I prove that by 51% probability that I'm right, I get the whole case thrown out. Immigration court, if you don't assert your rights at that moment when they're being violated, when ICE shows up at your house without a warrant, then you go to court, immigration court, it's a special separate court, and it's much harder to prove that your rights were violated. The burden, you have to prove, it was like an egregious error, which is a made-up constitutional standard that essentially lets judges do whatever they want. So it's much more important to assert these rights in the moment. And especially if you do have, privilege of not having an accent or, being white or being documented, learning your rights and being able to share them with your community, being able to assert them on behalf of folks who might not know them, and it might be more of a life or death situation. And then the last thing, really quick, that we also do through the National Lawyers Guild and just kind of through the community work of organizers, is passing sanctuary city policies. And if you've been following potentially the debate going on in Hartford right now, there's a great policy that was passed in Winooski that, you know, when cops give information about people's immigration status to ICE, that violates the 10th Amendment anti-commandeering doctrine, but they do it anyway because, you know, they're buddies, and there's many problems with the institution of police that I won't get into right now, but it's important that we assert our right to have the cops not be doing the work of the Trump administration's, like, concentration camp deportation scheme. And sanctuary city policies are a great way to do that. I have a couple copies, 2 copies, of kind of what I would say the golden ring of sanctuary city policies is, if anybody in the room has a connection with their select board and wants to maybe talk later about what to do. The reason that I like this one is it actually removes the federal statutory authority to deport people. And if you don't have the, you know, for example, Title 8 USC 1326 is the unlawful reentry, which is what a lot of folks get deported for. If you don't have that statutory authority, such as if you have a municipal ordinance that negates that, what you're doing when you rip somebody from their home, their community, is kidnapping. So this actually makes ICE action a state kidnapping offense, which is pretty cool. I've never seen it done before, but that doesn't mean that it wouldn't be amazing to talk to people about how to put that in place. That's all I'm gonna say. But if anybody wants to talk after or email me, you can do that at vermont@nlg.org.